Last year, I was going through a dark time in my life. I had left my husband of 5 years, and my 2-year-old daughter was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease that no one knows much about. I was grieving the loss of what I thought was a lifelong relationship. I never expected or wanted to call off a marriage at only 5 years, but he couldn't stay faithful. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, big enough for my daughter and I to be comfortable, but small enough that I could afford it between my salary as an editor for one of the local news stations and her child support if I absolutely had to dip into it to make rent for any reason. So I wasn't at the fanciest place, but it was cozy and ours. Again, it was a hard time. I was learning to live on my own again and trying to explain to my 2-year-old why she couldn't see Daddy every night at bedtime anymore. I was doing my best, and looking back now, I was actually doing way better than I knew. Luckily, I had the support of my wonderful friends and family, and even some of his siblings and parents, so I was never left completely alone in the hardest times. Move-in was a blur. There was so much going on with the divorce and my daughter's doctor's appointments, plus work, that I enlisted the help of friends and family, and thankfully they jumped in to help with unpacking and whatever else I needed. The first night I was fully alone in the apartment after everyone had helped unpack, and my ex-husband had our daughter for his new visitation schedule. I planned to order my favorite takeout, drink a glass or 3 of Moscato, watch some rom-coms, and probably have a good cry. After a FaceTime check-in with my best friend, I grabbed my glass of wine and waited on the Postmates to arrive. My ex-husband wasn't the worst of the worst, after all. He did offer to buy me my favorite steak dinner that night, and told me to just relax and take care of myself. As I was sitting on the love seat in the living room, watching the end of some Lifetime movie, my buzzer rang. I had left instructions for the driver to just come up and leave the food at the door, so I wasn't sure why he or she was buzzing over the intercom. Hello, how can I help you? Yes, hi Kathy, let me up, it's Charles. You must have the wrong apartment. I'm not Kathy, and I don't know anyone named Charles, I answered. Don't play, Kathy. I told you what happens if you mouth off, the man said. He chose the wrong one, especially after what I had just gone through, so I responded rather heatedly. Look, Charles, was it? I'm not Kathy, so I don't care what you think if I mouth off. This is not Kathy's house, and you need to leave before I call the police. Silence. Guess Charles got the point, I said out loud. My food arrived a few minutes later, and I happened to hear the Postmates guy in the hallway, so after he dropped the food off, I went to pick it up right away. Thanks, have a good night, I said. Thanks, you too. I was half expecting to see Kathy, but then I remembered what happened to her, he said, waving. He was walking too fast and already around the corner, so I couldn't ask him who the heck Kathy was, that I'd already heard about twice that night. I pushed it out of my mind and sat down to eat my dinner. I cleared up my dinner mess and headed to the kitchen to refill my wine glass. In the kitchen, there was a strong aroma of men's cologne. It was so strong, in fact, that my eyes began watering and I sneezed a few times. I knew there was no cologne anywhere in the apartment. My ex-husband didn't even wear cologne, so it wasn't as if I grabbed one of his bottles on accident. I had to get out of there, so I grabbed the wine from the fridge and headed back to the living room. Can this day get any weirder? I asked out loud. Turns out it could. I shouldn't have asked. I fell asleep on the couch, something I was notorious for. My friends and family always said I couldn't make it through an entire movie if someone offered me $1 million to do so. When I woke up, I had a strange feeling, like I woke up for a reason. I became more aware of my surroundings, realizing I was on the couch, which again wasn't a shock. But when I turned my head, I saw my wine glass floating over the table. as if someone was holding it there. It caught me off guard, so I gasped, and whoever or whatever was holding the glass released it, and it clattered back down on the coffee table. I was awake now. That was enough to have me on edge. Thankfully, the glass didn't break or even seem to have a crack. Later that night, I was finally asleep in my bed when I felt someone grab my leg. I jumped to a sitting defensive position, but there was no one there. I also noticed the same strong cologne smell as in the kitchen earlier. At first, I thought someone had broken in and maybe tried to attack me, but I looked around the apartment and no one was there. There was no sign of a break-in. I was shaking and my heart was racing. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and when I went out for my morning walk and the lady from next door stopped and said, "Oh, hey, how are you? Are you settling in nicely?" I said, "It's a bit of an adjustment, but I'm getting there." "Kathy would be so happy to know such a beautiful young lady and her baby moved in," she said, shaking her head. "Okay, who is Kathy? Someone else mentioned her yesterday," I asked. "Oh dear, no one told you?" she said, concern growing on her face. "Kathy lived in your apartment just over a year ago with her husband Charles. He was a dangerous man, always trying to intimidate and scare her." "I know, he stopped in here yesterday yelling at me on the intercom," I interjected. The neighbor went ghost white. "No, dear, that's not possible. Charles was drinking one night, came home, and Kathy wouldn't let him in. So he went back downstairs and started threatening her through the intercom. The next thing anyone knows is she was found face down on the hallway floor, not breathing. He was later found in his car, having taken his life too," she finished. I was literally too stunned to speak. I didn't know what to do. I had just pretty much learned I was being haunted by an abusive ghost ex-husband. There was no way I was calling my ex-husband crying, so I called my sister, who would at least listen with a sympathetic ear. Surprisingly, she said she knew a lady who did cleansings on houses and other buildings that were haunted or had bad energy. My sister called that lady, who came over to do a cleansing right away, thankfully before my daughter got back from her father's house. We just moved out, but the rest of the time we were there, we didn't have any other problems with the spirit of Charles, thankfully. I can't believe your landlord didn't disclose that to you, even though she wasn't found in the house. I'm glad the cleansing worked. Sometimes it just takes one, and sometimes spirits fight it, or the entity is just too evil. Thank you for sending in your story. If you have a paranormal story to share, email it to the address in the description below. Please like the video and subscribe if you haven't. And with that, I'll see you tomorrow, friends.